Welcome to Behind the Bar, day 19 of the Diddy trial. The prosecution continues to make their case against the disgraced rap mogul. Today, the testimony really did revolve around one witness, a woman by the name of Brianna Bongalan, and she testified to a couple things. Number one, she was hung over a balcony by Diddy. We're not quite sure what the relevance that is to the case, except to continue to give the jury the impression that this guy was capable of anything.
Painting a picture for that jury, huh?
And then the other really important piece of testimony, which I think you and I find very interesting, is the fact that according to Brianna's testimony, Diddy was tracking Cassie's whereabouts step by step over the course of a day with amazing precision, actually knew exactly where she was at all times.
This seemed like the key piece of detail. So as Jason said, Brianna Bongalan, she was a designer for Diddy. Sounded like someone who Diddy would hire on occasion, but not necessarily a bad boy employee in the sense that we've had previous personal assistants. But her real purpose in this trial is that she was close with Cassie.
Right.
They partied a lot together. A lot of the testimony was about how they did drugs together. They did cocaine and marijuana. She would buy it for Cassie. Cassie would reimburse her. She would occasionally get drugs from them.
And she partied with Diddy
drugs.
and Cassie. She
Correct.
delivered drugs to Diddy. She testified.
Yes.
She did drugs with Diddy occasionally.
Serious drugs, too. This is cocaine, ketamine, very serious party drugs. This was a phase of life where Cassie, by her own admission, was heavily into drugs. This woman was partying with her and also into drugs, although she has now apparently found some sobriety in the aftermath of this. But the key testimony that you alluded to was in 2016. Remember, March 2016 is the infamous Intercontinental Hotel beating video. That's around the springtime. In the summer of the same year, they were still friendly, and she says that they went on a shopping trip to a mall, she and Cassie. So this woman, Brianna Bongalan, and Cassie go to the mall, but apparently hadn't informed Diddy of where they were going and that they were going together. She says while they were on this trip, Diddy texted Cassie, "Where are you? Like, what are you doing now?" Sort of showing his controlling ways. And when there was an exchange between them, Diddy indicated that he knew where she had been the entire time and gave Cassie a list of the exact locations she had visited with Brianna that day, which is terrifying.
So this is 2016. The iPhone is out, but Find Your Friends and things like that are not yet perfected. To my knowledge, by 2016, you were not able to track somebody's whereabouts just by following their phone.
This sounds like tracking devices
or
on cars and things
a private investigator or one of Diddy's henchmen who he had following her. That was my first take. Maybe you are right. Maybe it's a tracking device.
Who knows? But he was tracking her whereabouts, and
Yes.
he wanted her to know, I know where you've been. And what this is painting, this is going to me towards the sex trafficking by force cause rather than the RICO case, which is more his enterprise and the past employees and the personal assistants who said they did things for him, illegal and whatnot. This goes towards painting the picture of Cassie being in a relationship that was entirely controlled.
But this is post-beating. And
Yes.
my understanding of the post-beating is that there wasn't much of a relationship at all immediately afterwards. They rekindled what was supposed to be a friendship, turned into a sexual relationship, but that happened much later.
Yeah, the final breakup being in 2018.
Right. I think that this was more in sort of this interim period where Diddy really didn't they weren't even dating at the time. And so the fact he's exercising the control over her, following her, is even more terrifying. I'm not sure how it exactly lends to the crimes he's alleged to have committed, but it's even more terrifying in that he didn't even, they weren't even dating at the time. He was just a crazy ex-boyfriend.
Yeah, it sounds like sort of once you're in his clutches, he felt as though dating or not, whether we were active, on again, off again, Cassie was a piece of property to him that he could control her whereabouts and what she was doing. And it sounds scary. Now, what this is effective for me in front of a jury is that it's not just Cassie's testimony, because Cassie's testimony, while extremely powerful, is fraught. It's an 11-year relationship. She has to deal with the fact that she stayed with him for so long. There's a lot of nuance in what Cassie's saying. When you bring up a third party who says, I also witnessed this, doesn't that lend more power and credence to the idea that this controlling relationship was not something Cassie had in her head, but that other people could objectively observe?
Well, look, I mean, how many witnesses do we need to tell the same story to get people to believe it? But I will say that on cross-examination, the defense counsel was not buying this story at all. At least that's what they were projecting.
They went hard at her, and for a good reason. She has filed a $10 million civil suit against Diddy where she has testified to a lot of this stuff and more. She testified that she was one
at
time
a deposition, right? was deposed?
No, I think it's in her complaint. In her complaint.
Okay,
She filed a complaint against Diddy in a civil suit where she described an episode where she was dangled over a balcony by Diddy. She said she was at an apartment. Diddy was rapping on the door. Cassie was there as well. She ended up on the balcony trying to calm things down. He came out, lifted her up by her armpits. Her feet were dangling, sounding like Suge Knight with famously Vanilla Ice dangled over a balcony. Really terrifying stuff. Said he was in a deep, deep rage. She wasn't exactly sure what he was upset about, but that he was threatening her life at that point on a 17th floor balcony. Now, on cross, you're right. Westmoreland, who is one of Nicole Westmoreland, who is one of Diddy's attorneys, very skilled, and she's a woman, and she is an African American woman. She was able to go very hard against this witness, and just question her veracity of her account. She said, "You sued this guy for $10 million. Is any of this even true?"
Is any of this even true? Which drew an objection from the prosecution that was sustained by the judge. But nevertheless, those kinds of questions, when you ask that kind of question of a witness, is any of this even true? It almost seems like I'm incredulous that a word you said. It's got to permeate the jury a little bit to have them ask the same question.
I think so. This is the first time we've really seen them. Diddy hasn't really challenged Cassie's testimony in this way, where they're sort of challenging whether it happened. They're saying it's domestic violence. He's a jealous boyfriend. It has nothing to do with sex trafficking.
Misconstrue it,
but this is now directly saying you're lying up there, and you sued him. You have a profit motive, and you are telling a tale that didn't happen.
Which is really important. I think over the next few days and weeks, you're going to see the prosecution call up more of these witnesses who have filed civil suits against him, and they're going to, obviously, as their right to do, going to be able to cross-examine those witnesses based on the fact that it seems like a money grab, and you're just basically trying to perpetuate this effort to lie about him in order to get money. And that's pretty effective. It's a pretty effective mechanism of cross-examination. So you're going to see this over and over and over again.
I think it's right. I mean, this is the hand that they're dealt as defense attorneys. One thing they're bringing up over and over again are the civil suits and settled suits. Remember, Cassie, the genesis of all of this with Diddy was a civil suit filed by Cassie that was subsequently withdrawn, but it laid out all the Kid Cudi stories, laid out all the monstrous behavior. And then she quickly settled it with Diddy. Now, they're saying, you just filed it for a profit motive and you quickly settled. To a person like Brianna Bongalan, they're saying, you're saying this stuff to bolster your ongoing civil suit against me. And I do think there's a level of effectiveness. Do you think the jury that's landing a bit and sort of muting or blunting some of this testimony?
We heard Kirsten Brown Neal, who was on the show on Monday, say that every time a witness admits that they've accepted or demanded money from a person who's on trial, their testimony becomes less credible to the jury. Doesn't mean it's completely ruled out, but it becomes less credible to the jury. And I think that's exactly what's happening here. It becomes less credible. She's got a motive that isn't just telling the truth.
I want to ask you one more question before we move to questions and comments. I think you're right. The prosecution is going to bring out more of these witnesses who have, let's call it, a mixed motive. They filed a civil suit, but they're also testifying. Is there a risk for the prosecution in putting too many of these people up that can be challenged in this way? Or is the idea to just flood the zone and say there's so many of these people, you can't discount all of these stories, even if some of them are lying. There's just so many that it becomes inconceivable that some of it shouldn't stick.
Yeah, without this case being televised and without us being in court, you and I, it's hard to really assess the veracity of the witnesses, how they appear. My guess is the prosecution is very carefully picking and choosing who they're putting up, which of these civil plaintiffs they're putting up, in an effort to obviously put the best testimony they can, but also the people that they think can weather cross-examination from very skilled defense lawyers. There is a risk. You can't just put them all up because some of them are going to be really bad witnesses, and you don't want to have to deal with that fallout. Because honestly, if one of these witnesses breaks down and says, within cross-examination, falls apart and says, I made the whole thing up because Tony Busby told me to, or whatever they might say.
Starts to taint everything.
It starts to taint everything. That becomes devastating to the prosecution. So they're going to be very, very careful with who they put up there.
I think you're right. Let's go to some questions. So Enhanced Creator says, what happened to all the lawsuits Tony Busby filed? A lot of them are still filed. I mean, he had a very difficult period where he wasn't allowed to practice in New York because his bar license wasn't up to date. I think he'll be able to get around issues like that, have other attorneys and pro hoc vice motions file these. Those aren't going away. And they're not all going to be dropped. They're very much sort of pending while the criminal case plays out, and then you'll see all those things come back to life.
It doesn't always happen that civil cases have to come after the criminal case, but the criminal case will take priority. Obviously, people have a right to a speedy trial. Diddy has a right to a speedy trial. They're going to try and push that along. The civil cases will linger in the background until it's resolved. I mean, he's clearly not out of the woods financially.
Right.
But if he is acquitted, he has enough money that he can take care of all the civil plaintiffs, make them very, very wealthy people in their own right, while maintaining hundreds of millions of dollars of his own wealth. So, if it was the other way, I can see Diddy wanting to take as many of the depositions of these potential witnesses as possible before they testify criminally. But this is the normal course of things.
On the flip side,
first and then civil.
If he's convicted, then he's just bled dry by these civil suits, right?
Yes.
I mean, because when you're convicted to a higher standard of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt, it becomes easier to prove some of these civil suits, and then he just loses money hand over fist, and it's a death spiral of a life.
Monkey Man asks, sounds like this trial will probably go on for a few more weeks. I think the prosecution's estimated that they have another couple of weeks, and then we'll see about the defense at 1 to 2 weeks.
Yeah, his defense attorneys say this may go past the 4th of July. I think they should be careful about sort of lingering too long. The jury is going to get restless at some point, and you don't want to upset them in that way. You want to present your case as efficiently as possible and send it to them to deliberate.
Yeah.
Bezo Logo says, is it illegal in the U.S. to hang someone over a balcony? Not where I'm from.
Well, I don't want to be where you're from.
I don't know where you're from, but
I don't know what banana republic you are from.
Keep me out of your town. Yes, very illegal.
Yeah.
Comments. Dana C says, I want to hear from Brendan Paul, Diddy's drug mule, who was arrested at the airport and then let go. I remember that being a huge piece of this whole puzzle. You're alluding to the guy when Diddy was boarding the flight. This guy was arrested, Brendan Paul. Yeah. And immediately everyone was like, he's going to spill everything. He's the guy who carries the briefcase. He knows where all the bodies are buried. I think Brendan Paul was seen as super important in the early going, and maybe has receded a bit where there's all this other testimony and all these other personal assistants. He may still come out of the trial, but who knows?
I will
say,
where is the insider who coordinated the freak-offs?
Some of these personal assistants have come up and said, I bought the baby oil. I got the hotel room I cleaned up.
Where's the person who says, I surfed through the internet and found, I mean, Cassie said that she did it.
Yes.
Sort of at Diddy's request, sourced these men to come to the freak-offs.
You think that's where Brendan comes back into play?
Well, I want to know where these guys are that can testify to the horribly illegal acts that he was doing on a day-to-day basis. Where's the CPA that talks about how Diddy would obtain the money in order to buy the drugs? I kind of want that. Maybe they're just not.
Yeah.
They're refusing to cooperate. Maybe they're pleading the fifth. All these possibilities, but where are these?
The prosecution has addressed very well the pleading of the fifth with all these immunity orders. Oftentimes, you'll see the witnesses come into court and they give them an immunity order, and then they force them to testify because they take away the threat that they're going to be self-incriminating.
One more thing I want to hit on. Damon asked a good question. Well, it's not a question; it's a statement. But Cassie isn't innocent. Undoubtedly true.
Doesn't matter.
Cassie did some awful things as well. That's used in cross-examination a little bit. It can be used in closing arguments to argue that Diddy was not she's got unclean hands in her own right, and maybe you should hold that against her. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter whether or not she's guilty of crimes. The question is whether he is.
That's right. In a civil context, sometimes this matters more. There's doctrines of unclean hands. In a contractual dispute, you can't sort of come with a sort of they call it unclean hands because it means you played unfairly as well, so you shouldn't be able to profit in an unfair way. In a criminal case like this,
it's all about Diddy.
What she's done is it doesn't matter. Not in this context. It's what they can prove Diddy did that's illegal. That's all they need. They can have witnesses who have their own problems. And you're right. Cassie's done some illegal things. We've heard all about them.
All right, guys. Thanks very much. We'll be back again tomorrow. See ya.